Clara had always prided herself on having quiet mornings, the kind where the world outside seemed to pause just enough to let her breathe. The sunlight poured through her blinds in thick, golden stripes, illuminating the kitchen table where she habitually left her mug from the night before. Milo, her orange tabby cat, perched lazily on the windowsill, blinking in the warm light, his tail curling and uncurling with hypnotic patience. She made coffee, the smell thick and rich, and poured it into the mug, feeling the heat against her palms. As she sipped, she began narrating her day aloud, a habit she'd picked up to anchor herself during long stretches of isolation. "Today will be normal," she said softly, glancing out the window at the quiet street below. "Nothing unusual. Just a regular day." Her voice sounded heavier than she expected, resonating oddly in the silent apartment. It was then that she noticed the small red envelope tucked between the blinds. She froze, staring at it. She did not remember placing it there, and her mind skipped the thought nervously. The envelope was perfectly intact, its edges sharp, almost too precise, and something about its presence made the morning feel suddenly different, as though a single note could shift the balance of the entire day. By mid-morning, Clara's uneasy curiosity had transformed into a gnawing tension. Her phone buzzed repeatedly, each message more unnerving than the last. Single words flashed across the screen: "Look, now, behind." She spun around, expecting to see someone in the apartment, but the room remained impossibly still. Milo hissed at an empty corner, the sound sharp and urgent, his fur bristling. She laughed nervously, attempting to convince herself that it was all a prank, some product of her imagination stretched thin by too much isolation. But then the envelope shifted. It had opened itself, revealing a folded piece of paper inscribed with an address she had never seen before. She felt her stomach twist. Something was not right, and the air around her seemed to thicken. Every familiar object, the worn coffee mug, the stack of books, the little clock on the wall, now appeared subtly alien, as if the apartment itself had changed while she wasn't looking. The afternoon sunlight brought no relief. Clara noticed subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in her surroundings. The kitchen chair was slightly askew, a book she had placed carefully on the shelf lay open on the floor, and her coffee mug, which she remembered being intact that morning, now bore a hairline crack along its rim. Milo prowled nervously across the apartment, stopping to hiss at walls that seemed empty to Clara's eyes. She began narrating aloud again, hoping the verbal acknowledgement of the ordinary would ground her. "It's just small things," she said shakily, her voice trembling. "Nothing important. Everything's fine." But shadows lingered longer than they should have, dark corners stretching in ways that defied logic. Every blink of her eye seemed to alter the space subtly. The room she had known intimately now seemed to have secret recesses, corners that had not existed before, and every object appeared to hold a latent, unspoken meaning that made her chest tighten with dread. As evening approached, Clara forced herself out for a walk, hoping the cool air and movement would reset her fraying nerves. Passing by the neighbor's window, she caught a glimpse of movement behind her in the reflection. A tall figure stood just beyond the doorway of her own apartment, completely still, wearing a dark hoodie and a featureless mask that made her heart hammer in her chest. Spinning around, she found nothing. Her apartment hallway was empty, perfectly ordinary in every way. But upon returning home, she found the red envelope had multiplied. Several identical notes now lay scattered on the floor, each inscribed with the same unnerving message: "Stop narrating. Watch closely." Milo's tail bristled again as he darted to the corner, arching his back. The air inside the apartment felt heavier, denser, almost suffocating, and Clara's attempts at rational thought frayed as fear seeped into her bones. The familiar, safe space of her apartment was gone, replaced with a subtly hostile environment that seemed to breathe around her. Night fell like a slow, deliberate curtain, and with it came the most terrifying changes yet. Clara noticed that objects twitched slightly when she wasn't looking directly at them. The walls seemed narrower, the ceiling imperceptibly lower, as though the apartment was constricting her. Milo refused to enter certain corners, his hissing sharper, more insistent, as if he could perceive some hidden presence. Clara's narration grew frantic, her words spilling out in an attempt to maintain her grip on reality. "Maybe it's stress. Maybe it's nothing. Just breathe. But the shadows in the room seemed to pulse in her peripheral vision, creeping forward imperceptibly when she dared to blink. Every detail she thought she knew, her familiar furniture, her personal belongings, was now suspect, as though the space itself had gained sentience and resented her presence. By late night, Clara's anxiety had transformed into terror. Her phone rang repeatedly, displaying no caller ID. When she answered, a distorted, whispering voice repeated her own words from earlier in the day, "Quiet morning. Today will be normal." Watch the corners. Panic surged through her chest, and she dropped the phone. Red envelopes had now formed a trail around the apartment, leading to a final note taped high on the ceiling, the handwriting jagged and unrecognizable, "Don't blink." Milo darted under the bed, hissing violently at a corner that seemed to ripple as though alive. Clara's heart raced as the very air felt thick, charged, and aware of her every motion. Each step she took seemed measured against an invisible observer, and she realized that narrating her day aloud, once a grounding habit, had drawn attention, marking her presence in a way she could not escape. Clara's narration became a desperate chant as darkness swallowed the apartment completely. Every object she named seemed to twist, distort, and move subtly when unobserved. The shadows stretched unnaturally, encroaching closer with every blink, and Milo hissed from his hiding place, ears flat against his skull, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She knew she could not stop speaking. Even a pause felt like surrender, like giving the apartment permission to consume her. The wall seemed to lean inward, the ceiling narrowing, and reflections in mirrors fractured into distorted versions of herself that stared back with hungry intensity. Time itself felt fractured, each second dragging like hours, and Clara understood with a bone-deep certainty that her day had ended the moment she noticed the first red envelope. Now, trapped in a space that had once been safe, narrating her fear was all that kept her tethered to existence, even as the shadows waited patiently for her to falter.